and welcome to Analysis with me, Jonathan Steele. Powers to strip British citizenship from those with dual nationalities has long been a tool available to the British government. Since 9/11, for example, more than 40 Britons with dual nationality, the vast majority being Muslim, have had their citizenship revoked. But now the government wants to go even further. It added an amendment to an immigration bill which would allow it to strip citizenship from people who held only British citizenship, a step that could render people stateless. The amendment was backed by a small majority in the House of Commons, but defeated last Monday in the House of Lords. Peers warned that the powers were an approach used by dictators and tyrants. But ex-Minister of State for Immigration Mark Harper, who declined to appear on today's show here, said in support of the bill that citizenship is a privilege and not a right, and that these proposals will strengthen the Home Secretary's powers to ensure that very dangerous individuals can be excluded if it's in the public interest to do so. So in today's episode of Analysis, we take a look at the powers that the Home Secretary Theresa May has at her disposal already, as well as her push for more powers, and a look at whether citizenship, especially for those born in Britain, is a right or privilege, as the government says. Joining me to discuss this in the studio are Patrick Gailey, a journalist at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, Sagir Hussain, spokesman for CAGE and a solicitor representing Mahdi Hashi, whose British citizenship was revoked while he was abroad over allegations of extremism. And on the line, we're joined by Ben Harris-Quinney, chairman of the Bow Group, and from New York by Aviva Stahl, an independent journalist who's contributed to Solidarity Watch, The Nation, Electronic Intifada, and others. Welcome to you all. But first, let's take a look at this video report.
The vote by the House of Lords last week is a challenge to the government, and many feel that it was a rejection of the steady erosion of civil liberties over recent years. When the immigration bill came before the Lords last week, many felt that the amendment granting the Home Secretary, Theresa May, the right to render terror suspects stateless was a step too far, with many Lords saying that this was a policy used by tyrants and dictators.
We were all internationally alert to the ways that such persons lacked full rights if they were rendered stateless. And that was why the Convention to End Statelessness came into being, with Britain being one of the countries at the forefront of such moves, and why we have been a beacon in relation to this issue. It's interesting that Germany, feeling and reviewing their own conduct in relation to statelessness after the Second World War, have made it part of their constitutional obligations that they would never remove citizenship once it is granted. The United States, too, a place, of course, which became a haven for those seeking sanctuary, never removes citizenship once it is granted, believes strongly that people should not be rendered stateless.
The bill was roundly defeated, and the government must now consider whether to amend the bill or push on regardless. The amendment poses the question, is citizenship a right or a privilege? Home Secretary Theresa May has stated that
citizenship is a privilege, not a right. The government will take all necessary steps to protect the public.
Her opponents in the Lords feel that the move will shift powers from courts to ministers and civil servants.
Revoking passports is a judicial function and not an administrative function. There are judges sitting every single day, and that is the right place to deal with this. The right to travel is a fundamental right.
Criticism of the bill from the field that the and human rights groups has been widespread, and Islamophobic attacks on civil liberties. Writing in the New York Times last week, Clive Stafford Smith, the director of the Reprieve organisation, wrote that this move by the UK government has been partly motivated by Islamophobia.
Clearly, with the London bombings of 2005 in mind, the Commons is still acting on fears that Muslims who might be radicalised abroad will return home to threaten the British Isles. Until those fears recede, we can expect continued manoeuvres to quicken our retreat from traditional standards of British justice.
In response to the defeat, our government minister offered the concession of an independent reviewer who would oversee the new rules and report back to Parliament on a regular basis. But whether the vote by the Lords is enough to stop efforts by the government to implement this power is another matter. Nathaniel Amos Sansom, Islam Channel.
Well, Patrick Gailey, let me come to you first of all. I mean, what exactly is Theresa May asking for? And is this independent reviewer she's suggesting any use, do you think?
Well, as the film suggested, Theresa May, the Home Secretary, is very adept at removing people's citizenship if she believes them to be dangerous individuals. She can already do that if they hold other nationality. What Clause 64, as it now stands in the immigration bill, wants to do is to be able to make people stateless. This is a somewhat of an anomaly in terms of international humanitarian law, in terms of refugee conventions and all this. There's a lot of debate within Parliament, although we didn't have it at the first reading of the immigration bill. Parliament is split between whether this is a good idea or a bad idea. Theresa May claims it's to do with a very few individuals who are very dangerous to British society, and she claims that being able to make people stateless will, in actual fact, make the British public safer. There are big problems with that point of view, of course, because a lot of people outside of Parliament and inside it believe that if someone is so dangerous that we feel the need to make them stateless, put them in perpetual exile, then surely it would be better, perhaps, arguably, to have them in custody and put them on trial and give them a right to reply to what they're accused of having done.
But if they're not abroad at the time their passport is taken away, if they're in Britain, then they can't travel, then they'll be here all the time. So how does that reduce the threat to Britain if they're always in Britain?
This is a bit of a red herring, actually, this idea of how would it practically work if Theresa May was to make someone stateless whilst they were in Britain. I've been investigating this for a number of months. Of the 17 people she's stripped of their nationality on conducive grounds, national security grounds, 15 were overseas at the time of the deprivation order being issued, meaning that it's harder for them to access legal aid, harder for them to access legal counsel. They do not have the protection of the British government when they're abroad. So the idea that people are going to be sort of incubated here in society without their passport, I don't think is the point. The very reason that Theresa May is seeking this statelessness power now is because one individual, Hilal al-Jeddah, won his case at the Supreme Court. He's in Turkey. As I said, there's only 2 people that have been stripped on conducive grounds ever in the UK. The rest are when they're abroad.
Well, Ben Harris-Quinney, let me come to you. I mean, how do you see it? Why do you think the government wants these new powers?
Well, I think you have to understand the political context first of all. I think it's been realised in recent years that not necessarily concern about Islam, but concern about immigration to the United Kingdom in general has risen and risen steadily since the mid-2000s. And I think this bill is really an attempt of this government to address that. Of course, this was in a sense a compromise bill because Dominic Raab did put forward an amendment a few months ago. The amendment was voted down, but that amendment would have actually gone further and essentially removed the United Kingdom from its obligations to the European Court of Human Rights.
Sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off a little bit at this point because I think the line connection is very poor. It's not very audible. I think we'll try and get a better line while I just talk to some of our other guests. Sagi Hussain, I mean, what is the case of Mahdi Hashi, actually, that we mentioned in the intro?
Mahdi Hashi is a young man of Somali origin. I think he left Somalia when he was about 2 years old. He grew up in Camden, North London. He originally came to prominence a number of years ago when he made a complaint along with a group of other friends, as he was a teenager then, that the security services were forcing him and his friends to become informants on the Somali community, various issues. He refused to do that, and that was publicised in an independent newspaper, and there were protests held, etc. But the harassment didn't stop. So a few years later, he just left. He got fed up with it, and he left the country. Now, I'm just going to have to be very careful to say this because I represent Mahdi. He's in custody at the moment in America. And part of my conditions to actually meet him, I've had to sign up to SAMS, especially the restrictive measures. So I've got to be very careful what I say, what I know from talking to him. However, what I'm telling you is those were publicly known facts beforehand. So nothing from what he's told me that I'm speaking here. So while he was out of the country, his citizenship was deprived. We made efforts with the British Foreign Office. We heard he was in custody in Djibouti, and that was told to us through somebody who had left the prison and had passed a message on behalf of Mahdi to his family. So we tried with the French embassy, with the Djibouti embassy, with the British Foreign Office to try to get access to him, but we got no luck whatsoever. That was a black site where people are sort of kidnapped and held in dark sites, and they are interrogated by the American, what's called the dirty team, and the FBI, etc., etc. This is a well-known fact that he was subsequently taken over from there to America.
From Djibouti? From
Djibouti. Yeah. So what you got is somebody who, a few weeks after his citizenship has been deprived, was then kidnapped by the Americans, held without due process, and then flown over to America without due process. Now, that wouldn't have happened if he had a British citizenship on him. So the argument is that whereas in the past we had these inquiries or attempts at Gibson inquiry or statements made by the Prime Minister about how the role Jack Straw and Tony Blair played since 9/11, where British subjects were kidnapped and tortured and taken to Guantanamo and other black sites, they were paid compensation as a mark of embarrassment because it's not British values. So what the suspicion is that now, to get around that, what you do is you take away their citizenship. Then if they are kidnapped, or in the case of Bilal Barjavi or Mohammed Sakar, who were droned and then killed by the Americans, then you can just wash your hands of it. So I think it goes further than the simple issue of statelessness or whether someone is extremist or not. But it's quite a dangerous development where really somebody is, as in the case of Sakar and Barjavi, can be executed, starting on the point is where they're held to be not conducive to the public good. So the arbitrary decision by the Home Secretary can lead, with no criminal process, can lead to an execution, or in the case of Mehdi Hashi, a rendition to America.
Let's get to Aviva Stahl's view from New York. I mean, is there a lot of collaboration of that kind that Sagi has just mentioned between the British and the Americans, and are they really working together to get around the opprobrium of rendition and all that sort of thing?
I mean, I think there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that points to complicity. Obviously, we don't know what the inner workings of the process are, who's selecting the targets, whether the British government is depriving some of their citizenship and then they're being droned or being rendered. But it clearly seems like there's a pattern of complicity. I think it's also important to recognize if you think about what Sigir said, about these changes happening in Britain because people being rendered to Guantanamo or whatever weren't seen as British values. I mean, Obama has really run on a campaign of situating himself as against Bush as a progressive man, and whereas Bush was more than happy to kidnap people and bring them to Guantanamo, Obama wants to set himself apart. And Mehdi Hashi is just one of many people who has been kidnapped kind of by local forces and also by the CIA or the FBI, and then held by the military for months, and then reappeared kind of in federal courts. And Obama is sort of using that as a way to essentially pursue the same policies of Bush, but under the guise of legality.
But Sergei, I mean, people have been killed by drone strikes, even if they're foreign, American citizens or British citizens already, haven't they? So this new power doesn't make it more likely they're going to be killed if the government decides that's what they want to do, is it?
Oh, no, absolutely. If that's a British position, then be transparent about it. Let's have this debate in Parliament. Let's decide who makes these decisions. And let's be open about it. Let's not play the dog whistle politics that necessarily this is going to be blowback, these people are there going to do this. Let's say, OK, we're withdrawing due process from people. Let's be open about it. Let the Parliament debate that. And if we reach a level where we no longer feel that the rule of law, the fundamental rule of law, values of rule of law are applicable in Britain, in this modern day Britain, let's have a debate about it. But what I don't like is this dog whistle politics where you're relying on this this climate of Islamophobia, and you use a language like it's going to apply to a few people. That is disingenuous. It's really appealing to the mob mentality. Look, it's only a few Muslims. Don't worry about it. And it's credit to people like Baroness Helena Kennedy and Lord Panic, who actually used their wisdom, have looked into it quite deeply, and seen the long-term implications of this. And I think that's why we need to have an open, frank debate. And let's not hide behind that Islamophobia that's trying to be used here.
Well, I mean, is it Islamophobia? I mean, these cases are very, very complicated in legal terms. They're not the sort of thing that the Sun newspaper or the Daily Mail leads on, surely, are they? And makes a big thing about how the government's really taking tough action at last, blah, blah.
No, I think the idea of being able to remove someone's citizenship based on a suspicion from one person has been conflated with the idea that there are in the UK foreign-born criminals who have...
it's a development of that argument, isn't
exactly.
it? Yeah.
So they've had the right to reply to what they're accused of, they've had the right to legal counsel, the right to be protected against cruel and unjust punishment, all these kind of things that we believe defines us as progressive in progressive societies. The argument, and I think this is probably a deliberate ploy, from the Home Secretary, she rammed this statelessness clause in right with the Raab Amendment, and the debate in the House got conflated. The two things got confused. Terror suspects and foreign criminals were therefore treated as the same thing. Now, as to whether there's an Islamophobic issue here, you know, all I can say is that of the cases that we've identified, the majority are Muslim. That is not to say that the Home Secretary does not take action for people who she believes them not being conducive to the public good if they are not. What it does lead one to the rather disconcerting conclusion is that if the statelessness powers do eventually go through, that creates two tiers of British citizenship. I'm British, I'm born in England, therefore I could not be affected by these powers. However, if you're naturalised or foreign-born and become just a British citizen, then you are affected. That means that someone who has naturalised and the Home Secretary deems not conducive to the public good, that makes their Britishness worth less than mine.
Let's put that. I think Ben has come back now. I hope the line is better. Ben, did you hear that last point? I mean, that there will be a kind of two-tier citizenship. People born in Britain will have better right to keep their passport than people who are not born in Britain are only naturalised. Isn't that just?
I don't actually think that's been clarified. I mean, I should say that that I'm not particularly comfortable with the Home Secretary having executive power to remove people's passports. I mean, that is one part of a much larger immigration bill that is designed to toughen up on immigration and security in general. But on that point specifically, I don't think there is any indication that that those citizens that were born in the United Kingdom are any less likely to have, or any more likely to have their passport removed than anyone else. I think the reason behind the reasons laid out in this bill for removing citizenship or for removing passport is that that these individuals are a threat to the United Kingdom, a terror threat to the United Kingdom. And of course, as we have learned with the London bombings, that could well come from citizens born within the United Kingdom.
So therefore, this bill won't make much impact. I mean, on protecting people from terrorism.
Well, I think it will, because as I say, there are a lot of other aspects that this bill tightens up on. It's actually not just about the revoking of a passport. I mean, that's actually a relatively minor issue when you look at immigration as a whole. I think a lot of more significant legislation here that relates to the necessity, for example, for landlords, employers to check the immigration status of those that they're employing or those that they are renting property to. And again, that's not really germane to the issue of terrorism.
No, I'd just like to, we're running a little bit out of time in the first section. I wanted to bring Aviva Stahl back in again. I mean, we heard in the intro that the United States does not take this powers on itself, the executive. Is that right? So you can't take somebody's US citizenship away in this way.
No, I mean, actually, there was like a Supreme Court ruling in the 50s, I have the quote here somewhere, that depriving someone of their citizenship was, quote, a form of punishment more primitive than torture. And I think Chief Justice Warren said that denationalization was, quote, the total destruction of the individual status in organized society. And I think that really speaks to the fact that, being stateless, essentially, in international law, means that someone has no way of advocating for themselves. They have no institutional body or means of claiming rights, because you can only claim rights in international law through having citizenship.
Okay, well, on that note, we will have to end the first section, but we will continue this discussion, and particularly on the point of whether citizenship is a right, or is it only a privilege which the government can take away. So stay with us. Okay.